Imagine a courtroom. Not the kind of modern courtroom with cold fluorescent lights and lifeless plastic chairs, but an ancient courtroom. A cold stone floor, towering walls, the kind of space where the weight of what is about to be spoken presses down on your chest. Even before a single word is uttered, everything is silent, but not at peace. Now imagine that the room is not filled with strangers, but with witnesses. And as you slowly look around the room, your heart begins to falter because you recognize them. There is an old man who built a massive ark when there had not yet been a single drop of rain. There is a woman who laughed when she was told she would bear a child at the age of 90. There is a shepherd who left everything familiar behind simply because an invisible voice told him to go to a land he had never seen. There is a woman rejected by society who risked her life to hide two strangers on her roof, simply because she believed their God was real. There is a boy who brought down a giant with nothing but a stone. There is a man who caused the sea to part before his eyes. All of them are here, and all of them are looking straight at you. This is not a random imagined scene. This is the setting that the author of Hebrews carefully constructed across 2 chapters, and it is one of the most powerful and haunting literary structures. It is one of the most sophisticated and striking argumentative designs in the entire New Testament. But the problem is, most people, when they hear about it, completely miss its true weight. In Hebrews chapter 11, this section is often called the Hall of Faith. And yes, that name is not wrong, but it has become so familiar that it has become harmless. When we hear Hall of Faith, we think of a gallery of achievements, trophies, glorious moments, brilliant victories. We imagine it as a list of great people who did extraordinary things for God and were honored. But no, that is not it at all. This chapter is nothing like what you have ever thought. Hebrews 11 is not an honor roll. It is a legal argument. It is a body of evidence. It is an author watching his audience quietly drift toward the door, ready to abandon their faith, and he grabs them, pulls them back, and says, "Before you leave, look at this. Look closely. Look at all the people who lived before you, those who felt exactly what you are feeling right now, those who walked in the dark without seeing the end. Look at those who still stood firm, those who died but did not let go of their faith. And then look at the one who wrote the entire story. Because this is the turning point of everything in Hebrews 11. Not one of them received what had been promised. Not one. They lived for a promise. They built their entire lives around something they never saw fulfilled with their own eyes. And the author of Hebrews says something shocking. That is not a tragedy. That is the definition of faith. We will walk through each person in this chapter, in the exact order they appear. We will look at what they did, why they were chosen, and what their story is truly saying, because behind all of it is a deeper truth about the nature of faith. And in the end, you will see what so many people have missed, something that, even after reading this chapter dozens of times, you may still not notice. You will see a single thread running through the entire Bible, a thread woven with blood and promise, from Abel in Genesis chapter 4 to the gates of the New Jerusalem in Revelation chapter 21, and Hebrews 11 is the crucial knot where the two ends of that thread are tied together. But before understanding that, we must understand something else. Who were the people who received this letter, and why? They were so close to giving everything up. The book of Hebrews was written to a community of Jewish Christians, possibly living somewhere within the Roman Empire, perhaps around the 60s AD. amid social pressure and increasing persecution. We do not know the exact time, and we are not certain who the author was. The early church debated this endlessly. Names that have been suggested include Paul, Apollos, Barnabas, Priscilla, and many others. But there is one thing we do know clearly. This author understood the Hebrew scriptures deeply, and he did not merely understand them. He was constructing an argument capable of holding back people who were standing right on the edge of losing their faith. He was writing to people who knew every detail of that system, people who grew up with the altar, with the smoke of sacrifices, with the sound of prayers echoing through the temple. And those very people were facing a very real danger, not of abandoning God, but of abandoning Jesus Christ. They were Jewish believers being pulled backward by their families, by their communities, by the very synagogues they once belonged to. They were being pressured to withdraw their confession that Jesus is the Messiah, and to return to the familiar temple system, return to the priesthood, return to the sacrifices, because that was the easier path, the path that could end social isolation, that could ease economic pressure, that could make the scornful looks disappear, even the threats. The old way, familiar, the old way, a safe, a path carrying the weight of centuries. And that is why the author of Hebrews spends the first 10 chapters saying one thing. Everything they are trying to return to is only a shadow. The priests are only a shadow. The sacrifices are only a shadow. Even the tabernacle is only a shadow. All of it is merely a faint reflection of a greater reality. And then he declares, Jesus is that reality. He is the better priest. He is the perfect sacrifice. He is the better covenant. To go back to the shadow, when the substance has already appeared, is not safety. It is loss. And then chapter 11 opens with a sentence so familiar that it is almost completely misunderstood. Hebrews 11:1, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It sounds like a definition, but it is not. It is a declaration. The author is not trying to explain what faith is. He is showing you what faith does. Faith breathes life into what does not yet exist. Faith turns the unseen into certainty. Faith is evidence, a title deed for what you have never held in your hands. It is the conviction that what is invisible is more real than what your eyes can see. And immediately after that, the next sentence gives the result. By faith, the elders obtained a good testimony. The word testimony in Greek is martyrio, the same root as the word martyr. In other words, these people did not just believe. They staked their lives on what they could not see. And they paid the price, a very real price, but what they bore witness to was not only their own faith, they were bearing witness to the faithfulness of God. Their life became living evidence of a promise not yet fulfilled. And then the witnesses begin to step forward. The first name is not Abraham. That surprises most readers. It is Obal, the second son of Adam, the first human in history to die, killed by his own brother over an offering. Genesis chapter 4 tells us that Abel brought the firstborn of his flock, along with their best portions. And God was pleased with his offering. The Bible does not clearly explain why. But Hebrews 11:4 reveals what Genesis only implies. By faith, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain. Through this, he was commended as righteous, God himself bearing witness to it. And then, a shocking statement. Though he died, he still speaks. Abel is dead, thousands of years before this letter was written, and yet he is still speaking. his life, his death, the blood that cried out from the ground in Genesis 4:10, is still sending a message that God sees what is offered in faith, even when the cost is everything, even when the one who offers does not live to see the result. The blood of Abel is the opening line of a long story, a story that is still being told, even now. And then the next witness steps forward. Enoch, one of the most mysterious figures in Genesis, a man of whom Scripture tells us only 3 things, but those 3 things are enough to shake every definition of faith. He walked not alone, but with God, with God. He lived 365 years, and then he was no more, no funeral, no grave, no trace left behind. He simply disappeared. Genesis 5:24 says that God took him, brought him directly into his presence. Hebrews 11:5 confirms it. He was taken up so that he would not see death. He was sought, but could no longer be found, because God had taken him. And before that happened, he had a testimony. A very short testimony, but enough to define his entire life. He pleased God. And then, the next line sounds like an irreversible verdict. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. Not difficult, not rare, but impossible, because anyone who comes to God must believe that he exists. And not only that, must believe that he rewards those who seek him. That is the core, not perfection, not a flawless record, but faith that God is real, and that drawing near to him is worth any cost. Enoch pleased God, not because he never failed, but because he believed enough to walk each day as if God were truly there, and that has always been the standard. From the beginning until now, it has never changed. Then comes Noah, and with Noah, this chapter begins to reveal an unbreakable pattern. Faith never stands still. It always moves, it always acts, and often it looks completely foolish from the outside. Hebrews 11:7 says, "By faith, Noah was warned about things not yet seen, and in reverent fear he built an ark to save his household, and by this he condemned the world." Pause for a moment and look closely. No rain, no signs. Perhaps no precedent for such a flood had ever existed. There was only a word spoken, and Noah believed it. He spent decades building a massive ark in a world that surely mocked him. He built, not because he saw, he built because he believed. The phrase, "things not yet seen," echoes the very definition of faith in verse 1. That is always the object of faith, not what you have already seen, but what you have never seen. Noah had never seen the flood, but the ark still rose. The ark was not the result of faith. It was the shape of faith. Faith made visible. And then the author says something unsettling. That very ark condemned the world. The obedience of one man exposed the disobedience of everyone else. Faith always does that. It cannot remain private forever. A life built on the unseen things of God will become a living testimony to all who have chosen to ignore them. And then Abraham appears. Here, the pace slows down, because Abraham is central. He is given more space than anyone else in this chapter, more than Moses, more than even the unnamed heroes at the end. And that is not accidental, because Abraham is at the center of the entire covenant story. Hebrews 11:8 says, "By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he would later receive as an inheritance." And then the next line is almost unbelievable. He went out, not knowing where he was going. No map, no itinerary, no defined destination. Only one command: go. Leave your country. Leave your people. Leave your family and go to the place I will show you. Not this is the place, but I will show you in the future, step by step. Abraham was not given a plan. He was only given a promise, and he walked, not after understanding, but before understanding. The author of Hebrews says he lived in the promised land like a stranger. He lived in tents. He never truly possessed that land. He lived as a sojourner on a promise not yet fulfilled. And then, verse 10 reveals what all of this was pointing toward. Abraham was not only looking at the land, he was waiting for a city with firm foundations, a city whose architect and builder is God. As from the dead, the author says that Abraham received Isaac back, as if from the dead, figuratively. But do not miss that detail. This was not an emotional impulse. This was a conclusion, a calculation. Abraham thought it through. He considered it, and he arrived at an unavoidable conclusion. God had promised that the offspring would come through Isaac, but now he is being asked to offer Isaac himself. Those two things cannot both be true unless death is not the end. Abraham believed in something that, at that time, had no precedent: resurrection. If Isaac died, God would raise him back to life, because God never breaks his promises. That was not blind faith. That was faith, grounded in the nature of God. And then the knife stopped, not because Abraham changed, but because God intervened. A ram caught in the thicket, a substitute, one life for another. And Abraham named that place, "The Lord will provide." But that story does not end there. The author of Hebrews says, Abraham received Isaac back as a figure, a picture, a foreshadowing of a day when another father would also lead his son up a hill, not far from that place. But this time, there would be no ram in the thicket, because this time the son himself would be the lamb. If you can see that, if you begin to realize that everything in the Bible is converging toward one point, then do not keep it to yourself. Share it. Keep seeking, because we are not even halfway through the story. Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, they appear, and then quickly pass, not because they are unimportant, but because what they share is unmistakable. Each of them speaks of a future they will never see. Isaac blesses. Jacob lifts his trembling hands, placing them on each of his sons. 12 blessings, 12 destinies, a nation spoken into being before it exists. And then Joseph, a man lying on his deathbed in Egypt, but his heart is not there. He says, God will surely visit you. And he gave an order, not about possessions, not about power, but about his bones. Carry me back to the promised land. He did not know when, he did not know how, but he knew it would happen. His faith was so specific that it came with burial instructions, and 400 years later, when the people of Israel left Egypt, Moses carried Joseph's bones with him, a promise spanning centuries, a faith that outlived death. And then Moses, a man standing between two worlds, the palace and the wilderness, power and surrender. Hebrews 11 says, he made a choice. He refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He rejected everything. For what? To suffer with the people of God. That makes no sense until you read the next line. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than all the treasures of Egypt. Understand this. Moses lived centuries before Jesus appeared, and the author says, he saw Christ, not with his eyes, but by faith, from a distance, far enough that everyone else missed it, but clear enough for him to trade an empire for it. He placed on the scales, on one side, Egypt, on the other, the promise of God, and he concluded, the promise is worth more. Not because it was visible, but because he was looking to the reward. Then comes the Passover, then comes the Red Sea, the two greatest events, the two most dramatic moments. But the author does not say, by Moses' leadership, nor by the people's courage. Instead, by faith, they kept the Passover. By faith, they passed through the Red Sea. As on dry land. Imagine that moment, water rising like walls on both sides, a path opening in the middle of the impossible. And they had to step in, not after the sea was fully parted, but while it was opening. That is faith, not standing still, watching a miracle, but stepping into the middle of it. His faith. It sounds simple, but look closer. The sea, blocking the way. No path forward, no plan B. And God says, lift your staff. That's it. No explanation, no evidence, only a command, and an ocean. And Moses obeyed. He did something completely unreasonable. By every law of nature, he raised his staff toward the impossible, and that is the point. Faith is not understanding everything. Faith is acting when you see nothing at all. After Abraham, after Moses, the next name makes people pause. Rahab, not a prophet, not a well-known righteous figure, but a prostitute, a Canaanite woman, someone from the very city that was about to be destroyed. If you were making a list of heroes of faith, you would not choose her, but God did. Hebrews says, by faith Rahab was not destroyed. Why? Not because of her past, but because of what she believed she had heard. Heard about the Red Sea, heard about Israel's victories, and she reached a conclusion. The God of Israel is the true God. No covenant, no foundation, no long history with God, only a decision to believe. And she placed her entire life on that decision. A scarlet cord hanging from a window. It seemed small, it seemed insignificant, but that thread marked a house that would not fall, while everything else collapsed. That is what faith does. It takes something invisible and makes it visible. It takes a belief and turns it into a line between life and death. And then the author accelerates. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets. Names stacked together, stories compressed into a single breath. Who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness, were made strong. But then the tone shifts. Others were tortured, refusing to be released. Others faced mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, mistreated. And then, one line, the world was not worthy of them. Do you see it? Faith does not always lead to victory that you can see. Sometimes it leads to loss, to suffering, to a road that makes no sense at all. But whether they conquered or whether they suffered, the verdict is the same. They lived by faith. And then, the final blow. All these, though commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised. Wait. They believed, they obeyed, they endured, and still they did not receive it. Why? Because God had planned something better, something that would include you, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect. This is not just their story. It is yours. You are not reading Hebrews 11. You are standing inside it. The same faith, the same unseen reality, the same choice stands before you now, to step back into what is safe, or to step forward into what is unseen. But that was the line between life and death. When Jericho fell, a city collapsed, but one house still stood, not because it was stronger, but because it was marked. That scarlet cord was not just a sign, it was a declaration. I believe in the way of God's salvation, and if you notice, that red had appeared before, on the doorframes in Egypt, blood as a sign, the same God, the same way of saving. And Rahab, a woman cast out of every system, was brought straight into the lineage of a king, into the very line of the Messiah. What does that mean? No one is too far to be brought into the story. No one. After Rahab, the writer almost pauses, not because there's nothing left to say, but because there isn't enough time. What more shall I say? And then the list explodes. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets. No more individual stories, only a wave, a current of people who lived by faith. What did they do? They conquered kingdoms, administered justice, received promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword. The weak became strong, the fearful became courageous. This is the part people love. Miracles, victory, deliverance. This is faith, when everything goes the way you hoped. But then, the rhythm suddenly breaks. Others, just 2 words, but they change everything. Others were tortured, not delivered. Others were chained, imprisoned, stoned, sawn in 2. Stop there. The same faith, the same God, but the outcome's completely different. Not escape from death, but passing through it. The writer doesn't avoid it. He doesn't say they lacked faith. He doesn't say they were wrong. He says they refused to be released. Why? Because they were looking beyond. To obtain a better resurrection. That's where everything converges. Faith is not just believing for rescue. Faith is believing even when there is no rescue. Faith doesn't always change the situation. Sometimes it changes the way you walk through it. The same chapter, the same list. One side, miracles, the other, martyrdom, and Scripture places them side by side, without distinction. Because in the eyes of God, both are victory, a thicket, just a ram caught by its horns in the bush, a temporary solution for an unbearable moment. But he didn't know. That wasn't the end of the story. It was only a shadow. Moses didn't see it all either. He saw the sea split, but not the cross. Rahab saw the scarlet cord, but not the blood that would be poured out. The prophets saw fragments of the future, but not the full picture. They lived and died, in between the signs. And you are standing on the other side of all of it. You no longer see shadows, you see the fulfillment, and yet, ironically, you still feel like them. There are still days you don't understand what's happening, still prayers that seem to hit the ceiling and fall back down, still roads where everything is so silent you begin to wonder if you've taken the wrong path. That is the connection between you and them, not in the miracles, but in the endurance without them, not in the answers, but in continuing to walk when there are no answers. And this is what this passage is screaming, not with sound, but with history itself. True faith is not seeing and then believing. True faith is continuing to walk, even when you see nothing at all. So when you feel like you're lost in the middle of your own story, remember, Abraham was 2, Moses was 2, Rahab was 2, even those forgotten in caves were 2. They didn't have the full map. They only had a promise, and enough courage to believe that the promise was worth living for and worth dying for. And then, there comes a moment when everything converges. No more symbols, no more shadows, no more distant promises, but an empty tomb. Proof that everything they believed was not an illusion. And if that is true, then every step you take today, every tear you hide, every time you choose not to quit, is not meaningless. You are not just living, you are writing a chapter you cannot fully understand yet, but one day, when the whole story is revealed, it will make sense, a meaning greater than your pain, greater than your waiting, greater than even you. So, keep going. Even when you see nothing, keep going. Even when you're tired, keep going. Even when everything in you wants to stop, remember, this race does not end in silence. It ends in glory. And when you cross the finish line, you will realize everything you went through was not scattered fragments, but necessary strokes to complete a painting that was started long before you were born and is still being completed right now. A thicket and a son still alive when he should have been dead. A moment when the knife was raised but never brought down. A father standing between faith and pain, and then a voice, a ram caught by its horns in a thicket, a substitute, one death in place of another, and he named that place. The Lord will provide, not has provided, but will, because even after the miracle, he understood. This was not the end. This was only a whisper of something far greater that was coming, and he held on to it, not because he had seen the whole picture, but because he believed that the one who was painting it never makes a mistake. And 4,000 years passed. The world changed. Empires rose and fell. Languages disappeared. People came and went. But the story of that mountain is still being told, because it turns out it was never just a small moment. It was a shadow of another hill, another day, another son, another father who did not hold back. There was no ram caught in a thicket this time, no last-second substitute, only silence and a promise fulfilled. And if you miss that connection, you will think your story is just as fragmented. Unanswered prayers, closed doors, dead ends, but listen carefully. Silence is not absence, delay is not denial, and an unfinished story is not a failed one. Maybe, just maybe. You are living in a chapter whose meaning can only be understood later. You are looking at a single piece and wondering why it feels so strange, while the one who created the whole picture sees everything, those in the stands. They are not looking at you with judgment. They are not saying, "Why are you so weak?" They are not saying, "Why haven't you finished yet?" They are saying, "We understand." Because they ran in the dark. They believed without evidence. They kept walking when everything in them wanted to stop. They know what it feels like to hold on to a promise you cannot prove. They know what it feels like to be called crazy by the world, just because you didn't quit. And now, they are no longer holding the baton. You are. Hebrews 11 is not a museum. It is a relay race through time. Abraham ran his part. Moses ran his part. Rahab ran hers. The unnamed ran in silence, ran in pain, ran with no applause. And then they passed it on. To you, not because you are perfect, but because you are here. Not because you are stronger than they were, but because you are the next part of the story. And all of them, famous or forgotten, were running toward the same place. A city, Not a city you can find on a map, not a place you can buy a ticket to reach. A city with solid foundations, a city untouched by time, a city where every promise becomes reality. And what's astonishing is, its gates don't face just one direction. They open in every direction, because the invitation was never for just one group. It is for anyone who has ever believed, even a little, in a world full of doubt. The blood of Abel is still speaking. After thousands of years, it still echoes. But it is no longer the only voice. There is another voice, stronger, deeper, and full of hope. A voice that doesn't just cry out for justice, but opens the door to mercy. And those two voices, woven together, tell one single story. The story is true. God is faithful, and not a single one of his promises falls to the ground. So, you don't need to see the finish line to keep running. You only need to know who is standing there. You don't need to understand the entire plan to take one more step. You only need to believe that the next step still belongs in the story. And if today you are tired, if you're standing in a chapter where everything feels unclear, if you're wondering whether any of this is worth it, remember, you are not the first to feel this way, and you will not be the last. But you have an opportunity, one that not everyone recognizes. You can be the one who doesn't quit. You can be the one who keeps running when no one is watching, who keeps believing when no one understands, who keeps standing when everything is shaking. And one day, not in noise, but in a moment so clear it takes your breath away, you will look back, and what once confused you will make sense. What once hurt you will become essential. What once made you want to stop will be the very thing that carried you to the finish line. And you will realize you were never running alone. You were always running inside a story far bigger than you. A story that began long before you. A story that will continue long after you. But right now, it needs you. So don't stop. Don't step off the track just because you can't see the finish line. Don't let go just because you haven't seen the results. Run. Not with the certainty of what you can see, but with the conviction of something deeper. And when you feel like you're about to collapse, remember, there's a great cloud of witnesses watching, not to judge you, but to whisper, keep going. Not because the road gets easier, but because you've come too far to turn back. Keep going, even when your steps slow down. Even when your heart feels heavy, even when everything ahead is still unclear. Keep going, not because you can see the future, but because you trust the one who stands in it. Maybe today you only have the strength for one more step. Then take that one step, because sometimes faith is not running fast. It's refusing to stop. One step, then another, then another. And you don't even realize you're getting closer, closer to the promise, closer to the meaning, closer to an ending you've never seen before. And then one day, when everything grows quiet, when the race is finished, you will stand there, no more questions, no more doubts, only one undeniable truth. It was all worth it. Every tear, every waiting season, every step taken in the dark, all of it, led you here. And when you look back, you won't say, I was strong. You will say, he was faithful. So right now, while you're still on the track, while you're still in the middle of the story, hear it again, not as a command, but as a call full of hope. Keep going. And then, everything returns to one point. Not on Abraham's mountain, not at Moses' Red Sea, not on Rahab's wall of Jericho, but on another hill, A cross, a man, and a promise, finally fulfilled. Everything they saw was only a shadow. Everything they believed was pointing to this moment, where faith is no longer just waiting, but becomes fulfillment, where blood no longer cries out for justice, but opens the door to mercy, where death is no longer the end, but a doorway. And that means their story was never just their story. It was always a story leading to you. You, standing in the middle of an unfinished chapter. You, running without seeing the finish line. You, believing when everything around you makes no sense. But now you know what they could only see from a distance. The ending is real, not because you feel it, not because you can see it, but because it has already happened. And if the ending is real, then every step you take matters. Every time you refuse to give up, every time you still believe, every time you stand back up, when you could have stopped, is writing a part of a story greater than yourself, a story that one day you will look back on and finally understand. Nothing was meaningless. Nothing was wasted. No faith was in vain. So, don't stop in the middle of the chapter. Don't walk away from the race while you're still running. Don't trade the eternal for a temporary escape. Remember, those who came before you did not receive what they saw, yet they still believed. But you have seen what they were waiting for. So, keep going. You don't have to be faster. You don't have to be stronger. You just have to not stop, because at the end of the road, there is not only a reward, there is the one who promised. And when you arrive, you will realize you were not just saved, you were led, from beginning to end, by a story that has never failed.